And that sort of like kicked off that whole thing. It just threw everything out. And the moment it did, it's like it revealed the true manipulation which was going on at that church there. So here we have part 2, and we will be coming to that mind-blowing information that came up a year later after the investigation, and all this footage that you're going to be seeing at the moment. It is like gradually, like an onion, taking off one layer and one layer, and when you do, you discover another aspect of what's been going on the manipulation of the energy of this crossing point. But before we go into all of that mind-blowing stuff that's coming up, let's just get into what the work we were doing last year in regards to the churches. So normally I would literally go from one church, one crossing point to another crossing point and organise those crossing points. And normally between those two crossing points, things would pan out and get back to normal. But this was slightly different, and there's a reason for this, because there's a manipulation that appears to be going on in one of the two churches. We started off the first journey. We went to
St. Peter's.
St. Peter's Church, that's right. We went off to St. Peter's Church.
And Lizzie and Mick had already said that they'd felt a difference between being at that church, just generally, their observation, and the second church. So did we know that before we started?
It may have came out as we came to the other church, but it certainly didn't feel. And we went to the first church here. So let's just start off with our visit to St. Peter's.
Feeling a little bit like Bambi with my blossom there. Lovely blossom, actually. It's cherry, isn't it? Cherry. Anyway, back to the church. We're at, it's not St. Nicholas, and I thought it was St. Nicholas. It's St. Peter's Church. And there's the church that's just behind us, and the line actually comes from over that sort of direction there, and it comes through here. So there seems to be some sort of construction on the line that's down there that we saw driving past earlier on. So I'm going to have a quick look at that on the way back through as well. But we're just going to douse here and see what's going on in this church here, see if we can pick up anything that's going on.
So as you'll see running through here, this is our investigation of the St. Peter's. But we didn't find that there was anything wrong with St. Peter's, did we?
There was nothing majorly untoward.
No.
I mean, you found a few tombstones that were a little bit, not desecrated, but were not as in order, and you just sort of felt that there was a little bit of lack of respect maybe within the way things were maintained and looked after. But there was nothing really major that stood out energy wise.
No, it seemed pretty normal, really, and it was like fixing scratches on a fender. That's what it was. There was no actual real structural damage. There was no damage to the energy. Everything seemed really normal, and that's what really should have triggered something within me to sort of say there's something majorly wrong here within these crossing points. Because one crossing point was absolutely fine and was radiating the energies and the lines as it should be. And, as we went round the church, as you say, there was only sort of a few tombstones that had been desecrated and stuff like that, which can cause problems. Like in another church I went to, someone had burnt a car on one side and it melted all the stained glass windows, which caused a problem. And this is why it's really important to look after your local environment and getting involved in your local environment. So we went to that first church, and there was nothing.
So it really pointed the finger at the second church, and especially as Lizzie and Mick had sort of said they had felt something just a little bit off at that church as well.
So we rounded up the St. Peter's Church quite easily. Yeah. We even questioned whether a construction site just on one side of the church could have been causing any problems.
Yeah.
And it didn't seem to be, And this is going to be quite interesting because renovation and construction work is going to play a feature in this later on. This is why you got to look at everything that's going on around you. So then we hot-tailed it over to St. Cosmas. Yeah. Because I keep calling it St. Cosmos. And I do apologise for that. It's St. Cosmas. And we went on to St. Cosmas. So here's the initial research we did nearly 18 months ago. And this is what the real problem was.
Oh, straight away we noticed there was a misarray with the energies the minute we set foot in the place.
So here is the investigation of what we did a year and a half ago.
Okay, so we've come down to another church here called the Cosmos. Wow, we're actually in the centre of the cosmos. How brilliant is that? Now, this church here, even before we came through the gates, already was just like jumping at us. Everybody that is here with us at the moment. We're going to be talking to Mick and Lizzie in a minute about this church as well. But yeah, it's the funny thing is, Tanya, you were down with me when we did the other video on war. What is it used for? At Westwell Church, which is just over here. And what were you saying?
Well, there was a thing outside that church which showed a cluster of churches, and St. Cosmos was one of those clusters. So, quite coincidentally or not, we've arrived at one of the cluster of those churches.
And you thought there was something. You thought there was something wrong with it.
Yeah, it stood out. Even the name.
Yeah.
St. Cosmos.
And that was last year.
Yeah.
So about the similar sort of time when all the things started kicking off for them. So we're going to go and douse this place. It's a beautiful place, obviously. And it's definitely pulling in. It's not pushing out. It's like there's something going on there. Oh, sheesh. Yeah, there seems to be some sort of vortex going on here. I just need to, it's hitting your solar plexus, is it? Let me just go across here. I need to sort of see whether I'm coming on a line, onto a line. Okay, so there you go. There's not a line there. But if I sort of do a vortex, if I'm looking for the vortex, this is where it comes. I need to come out a little bit, sorry. So if we're coming into the vortex, that's where it starts kicking in. And that is really pulling us in there towards the line. It's like or pulling us into the center of the church. So there's obviously something that's going on with this church that doesn't really quite sit. Now, we'll just quickly go into the masonry, the Freemasonry sort of like sacred geometry. So we've got 3 windows there, and they've got 5 petals at the top. We've got 2 with 5 and 2 with 5. So there's a mixture of male and female going on at the same time, which is all a bit weird. And also, they seem to be boxed off as if like it's not really being used, as if it's almost sort of saying, come and use me, So it's got 2 names, Cosmos and Damien. Let's just quickly do dowsing.
So as we started, already, before we even got to the crossing point, there was this vortex out of the centre of the church, in front of the church. You felt that, Tanya, differently.
Yeah, it wasn't normal. It wasn't in line. Nothing was in line. I'd been used to having things fairly sort of straightforward with females and male lines, but this was not anything I'd experienced, so it felt very strange.
Everything was off, and we'll see a little bit later on the investigation on this church where the second point of offness was, which creates that loop factor that I was talking about earlier, in the previous video. So everybody felt that as well, isn't it? It wasn't just me and you. It was everybody else, Lizzie and Mick. And
they definitely had preempted there was something a bit off about just generally being in the energy of that locale.
So as we went round the church, this is what we found round the other side of the church, where we noticed that change in that video that came out yesterday. So let's just play you that investigation.
And now we start getting into that male line that's coming in here. And in fact, I'll tell you what, I think this church is not on the right place. They built it slightly off. Because I reckon, let's just have a look what's down on the other side of this wall. See if there's anything down here. Is there a spring or something? No, there's not a spring or anything. I got a funny feeling the crossing point is more here, which is outside of the church. This is very rare. And this is what it seems like it's trying to, it's almost as if like the place is trying to find its balance, its harmony, but can't do it because it's out of whack. It's like sort of trying to have balance and holding a weight on one side. So you're constantly compensating for that weight on the other side, which makes that erratic sort of vibration. And once you get that going on here, and what was going on at the other church, which we saw in the other church, and the house now is somewhere between the two, so we got the one church here, and the house is between the two, that's where the complications of the two vibrations that meet, and that's what helps to create that sort of scenario with that blister and stuff like that. So, great place. Let's just go and see if we can try and get inside.
Okay, so this was our investigation 18 months ago, and at the time I thought that the actual church was not built in the right place because the crossing point was not in the centre of the church. It's only when we went into the centre of the church that I realised there was a crossing point in the centre of the church, and there was something going on that was far greater. But I couldn't quite see what it was until we got the information from within inside the church. And this gave me ideas of what was going on. But first things first, and the most important thing, was to smooth out the energy lines so it makes living within the village and certain houses a lot easier, so they don't experience all these complications and phenomena with ghosts and so forth. So there was an understanding that there was a vortex that was outside the front of the church, and there was a vortex that was out to one side of the church. But there was a crossing point in the middle. And these vortexes were at some point installed by geomancy or some form of manipulation on the two. But at the time, 18 months ago, it just seemed like that the church wasn't built in the right place. It's only later on, with the following events that happened, that unmasked what was truly happening within the church at St. Cosmas and St. Damien. Now, this will start to become a little bit more sort of elucidated when we go into the church and we hear a little bit about the history of the church from one of the most beautiful wardens of the church, who kindly give us a brief history of the place.
In a very bad state because this park was used for manoeuvres with the army, out of bounds to the village. So the church wasn't used during the war.
Right.
After the war, we had some very bad winters, 1947, etc., with dreadful snows, and the roof collapsed, and the church was in an awful state. I mean, there'd been a lot of explosions and bomb things as well, you know, all around, and it got in a bad state, and they had to decide whether they were going to abandon it or rebuild it. Or, well, it wasn't completely rebuilt, but restore it. They restored it.
Excellent.
And then that left them with all these white walls, and they started doing these murals.
Okay.
Art students did those in the Lady Chapel there. They're about the saint.
That's the female chapel down there, is it?
It's the Lady Chapel.
There you go. Right. Okay. Lovely.
Yeah.
And this.
And the pictures are of the Saint Cosmas and Damien, which are our patron saints.
Right, excellent.
They did that. Then they did a famous artist, John Ward, who was quite young at the time, and his friend did these, which are all the biblical stories.
Of course.
But with the setting and people in the village at the time, the 1950s.
Like they used to do with the gargoyles at the time when they used to, Yeah.
Now, then for the millennium,
they
did this one, which is the entry into Jerusalem, only set in, again, our countryside,
Okay.
with, again, the people that were in the village in about 2000.
Excellent.
So,
Okay.
and the same artists did it. They did it when they were young men in the 1950s. They did these when they were in their 80s.
Wow. Are they? Whereabouts are they buried in the church?
There's a little thing that says where their
I'll
graves are.
go and
And
thank
John
them.
Ward,
Yeah.
one of them, was a famous artist. He taught the king to paint, Prince Charles.
Oh, right. Okay,
And
really?
Prince Charles, when he was doing these murals here, Prince Charles came down to have a look.
Wow. Excellent. Or King Charles now, obviously.
King Charles.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So once we'd sorted out the energy lines, and I just smoothed off the energy lines and etc., made them run a little bit smoother, and it seemed to make everything calm down. So I thought, okay, job done. I wasn't 100% happy with it, because I just put it down to the idea that the church was built on the wrong place, and that there will be teething problems with that energy line eternally, whilst that church is still there. But that was all about to get thrown on its head later on, and there was a reason for that. Now, approximately about sort of 6 months ago, things started kicking off again, and all of a sudden, and this is where, so Tanya has been here, obviously, I've been traveling around. Unfortunately, I'm not here all the time. And this is where you started getting all the information that was coming back. So what do you want to pick the story up your side?
Well, I just got reports back that there was, everything was kicking off outside. To be fair, not so much inside, but outside of the house. And this was due to the fact they were renovating the house. So they were extending the house and had actually moved out of the house while the property was being done, and were confronted by all manner of things, with knocking on the doors of their temporary accommodation outside, loud conversations outside. The dogs were going absolutely crazy. So it was really very, very disturbing.
Was there any accidents on the work, on the building site?
I don't know if there was any accidents, but it was just, as far as them being outside, they were suffering all manner of disturbances,
complications.
Yeah. So, but yes, so the renovation was well underway, and also I think that Mick saw a figure on the inside of the property, on the stairs on the inside of the property. So at that point, I think I mentioned to you that things had kicked off again, which presented you with what I didn't know they were going to renovate. So I didn't know that was relevant. Yeah. So can you explain why the relevance of renovating after you've done work in a specific spot?
Well, energy gets used to, it likes it when there's consistency, because then energy can then explore the inconsistencies in the world around it, as it were. But, once you start changing aspects, building and so forth, and this is why sometimes old ancient villages, which was also played a little bit of a part in this story as well.
Anglo-Saxon settlement in the backyard.
Which was at the back of their back garden and stuff, between their house and the church of St. Cosmas. There was an old settlement there. So this can change the vibrations in the place. And when you told me, they said, "Oh, they've renovated," I kind of thought, "Oh, right, that means I need to pay attention to what's going on with the energies and so forth." And I was sort of like surveying it from afar. And you hadn't really told me at that point about the complications that they were having and the thingy. There was another factor that came up, which was major, which basically sparked everything back into life. And that was that figure that you say that Mick sort of saw at the base of the stairs and stuff like that.
Yep.
And that was followed on by an accident on the stairwell.
Yeah.
With a new member of the family that had arrived just previously, and that put me back into what the blazes is going on.
And there was an accident with a dog as well.
which I picked up on when
Yeah,
I went to see him. When I went to see him the other day, the dog came and saw me, and yeah, it did have a lampshade on, but when it was just sitting there, and I just kind of went. And
That was the little black dog that was in the video when you did the first dowsing as well.
Yeah, we went up and told the other black dog and said, "Come and have a look at the dowser." Yeah, and you can go in the back and see that. It's really quite nice. But I had the feeling in my leg. I could feel the pain in my leg, in one particular leg, and I was kind of went, just turned around and said,
"What's happened?
What's happened? Did she get, she'd have a problem with her leg, and she got run over, didn't she?"
Yeah. With the other dogs in their backyard.
And one of the things is that one of the spirits had told Mick to be careful, to look after the dogs in particular.
Yes, that's right.
They obviously play a role.
And a dog got let out onto the road. I think they lost one of the dogs.
And they'd lost another dog, right? Okay, well, and that sort of like kicked off that whole thing. It just threw everything out. And the moment it did, it's like it revealed the true manipulation which was going on at that church there. And that ties into a lot of different things.
The other interesting thing was that I actually visited the house after the renovation, and there was a particular room that Lizzie had observed was much colder and didn't feel quite right. So I had a conversation with you on the telephone, and you literally remote viewed a renovation you'd never even been in, and you went, "Oh, is that up on the stairs and on the left?" And I'm like, "Yes." So we picked that room, and that room happened to sit directly above the room that you'd worked on in the first video.
Okay.
So you need to explain about the portal and potentially how it literally was still in the same space, but it moved into the renovation.
Basically, the blister was coming back. And so then basically I bolted a door shut, and I asked a spirit friend of mine, Shiva, to guard it so there would be no more complications until I had the chance to get back to the UK and deal with it on a physical basis, because it needed to be dealt with once and for all, and taking it away. And that brought us back to the church at St. Cosmas. Now, that's what you would have seen in the energy videos that we were doing on that was last Sunday, and how we were testing the energy lines according to what happens with solar impact energies that come through, because it does affect the lines, and it affects you and it affects me. You have an aura system, you have chakra systems, and those chakra energies, they do crossing points exactly as we find in churches and so forth. No matter if you look at the system as a universe or if you look at one person, the system replicates itself throughout all of life. And once we understand this, whether you look at it really big or small, even down to a cellular level, you will always find the same repeating problems and the same benefits that you can get out of this energy. So this is why it's important to get into this work. This is why we do a lot of this sort of stuff on the workshops that we do on this sort of channel. So we had to go back to Cosmos, which completely, changed totally the way in which I dealt with the energy. I was not messing about anymore. Before, obviously, through respect for churches, religions, and so forth, and belief systems, I'm not anybody's judge. That's not my job. What I do is, if you imagine, I take the pollution away from a bit of land. I'm not the person who is then going to replace it with some other form of pollution that I think is much better. And I'm not going to look for convictions of the people or spirits who polluted that crossing point, that energy in the first place. That's not my job. I'm not your judge. My job is to make sure that the energy flows properly, and that we can have an expanding consciousness collectively as much as individually, so we can take this step through this transition that we're all going through. So what's happened before, and the magic or the manipulation actually then starts tying into a system that's far greater. Now, this system is about siphoning off and redirecting the energies to power power structures, and that can be through business, it can be through governance, it can be through traditions, and and it can be through religion as well. So often on churches, you'll find that there's a slight siphoning off of the energy, certainly in mainland Europe, by the Roman Catholic Church. Because they do understand the energies. I don't know if you've ever seen a video on the garden of the Pope. You should really go and see that. It's an energetical workout zone. It's absolutely amazing. Well, that's a video for another day that I can go into. But it's understanding how energy works. Now, we were talking earlier on, weren't we, about the Cistercian and so forth. And if I go into, and I do a lot of sort of, just for my own pleasure, dowsing abbeys, old abbeys. And the Cistercian monks used to work in their fields, doing their allotments. And as they worked in a particular square, they created a mantra for that particular square, which redirected their energy to the people who were on the Crusades at the time to empower the Crusaders so that the crusade will be beneficial to them. And they did a different mantra in each square. And that created what we can still douse today as called what I would call a black table with a magical formula in each square. It's a very complex system because when you're manipulating energy, it has to be incredibly complex. When you go back to strip it back down to the natural energies, things become a lot more simpler and very much more easygoing. And that's what took me back to the Cosmos Church, where we bring into the royal family. And this is when the realization that obviously, as I say, I'm not here to prosecute anybody who's done anything, and I don't necessarily believe that they know that they've done anything, but they carry that spirit of the royal family, which is connected to a whole network of spirits that can do a lot of stuff around energy points without even, the person who is living in the form of a royal member may not even know about. So this is what I'm saying. I'm nobody's judge here, and I believe that it's a futile thing to go down a judgment road. But this manipulation of the energy caused the displacement of those two vortexes outside the church, which created by a ring, as I explained on that other video, which I'd like to show you now.
So we can't actually physically go in the church, but then that's never been a problem before, has it, Tanya?
No.
You've done many a sort of meditation when you've followed lines, and we've visited places like 300-400 miles from where we are now, and they turned out to be exactly how you saw them, didn't they?
Yes.
It is amazing. We can all do this. It's just what I teach on my workshops. Okay, so just connecting to that energy there. There's something getting it straight in the neck. Right, I'm going to have to obviously do a bit of spirits as we go down here. Thank you. So you find your neutral point, and when you find your neutral point, that's when you can connect with all sorts of spirits and energies that are in the area. They can obviously see you, you can see them. It's a little bit like how Frodo puts on the ring, and then the Nargles can actually see them, and they can actually see me now. Okay, so just need to sort out a few spirits here. Sorting out, there's 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's it, cool. The rest of them have all backed off, simply because they know there's no point messing. Okay, so now we can just follow that line in. Here we go, and that's that not there. So they've broken the line. That's what they did with a ring. don't know if you can hear the clicking on the video or not, but my right hand in particular will be clicking as I work. And then once the work is finished, right, and there you go, that's that one out, that's that one out, that's that one out, and that's that one out. And let's send that ring off to be recycled. There you go. Break that 2 there, which has been stopping it from recharging. There you go. Ha ha ha. So you get the energy flowing straight back through. Excellent. And there you go. The work is done. Just close it off. Thank you. Thank you. Let me correct anything else. Thank you. All on a Sunday. I don't know how you do you feel any different? It feels, I get the much lighter goosebumps, and it seems to be freer flowing now.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. That is great.
One thing I realise is that the big change between that was going on at St. Cosmas, and I understood the greater aspects of that sort of thing, realising that St. Peter's Church was not the problem. The problem was all to do with that burnt out house.
Well, that was the final piece of the puzzle,
Yes.
which you've now explained was the sort of where the energy really couldn't go anywhere and created literally heat.
Yes, a dead end road. And that's where the energy, the natural energy, the universal forces that came through from St. Peter's Church was confronting the energy coming out of St. Cosmas. And that's where it was confronting here. The house that we were dealing with was just set before that. And when you look at the property that is burnt out, which is now going to be renovated, so I will be checking it again in a year's time, because I do that. And just, without telling anyone, just make sure everything's going hunky-dory and just prepare the land to be renovated. So explain to energy what's going on. That's really important.
Because we did pop across the road and have a look at that house, didn't we?
Yes.
And you felt something in the back of that area.
Maybe they'd like. Let's just show you what we found. That and go into that, and then I can lead back into what we cut out of the other one. Okay.
Didn't want to miss that bit.
No. Okay. So now, as I explained, obviously it connects to Cistercian monk systems, the Benedictine monks, also the royal family. It also connects into Henry VIII and the conversion of the churches in the UK into C of E, Church of England, which the royal family is the head of, which took an energy away from the Roman Catholic Church at the time. Now, that was 500 years ago. And what was happening to the UK 500 years ago? It was the start of the British Empire that had started there, because they knew how to filter off the energies so they could use that to propel the UK or the British army or power base into a world-dominating force, because it's only a tiny island. And to look what they did, they had more than just good sailors in order to do this. They had energy behind them because they were filtering it off. And that's the thing about energy. Energy doesn't judge. Energy just explores. And it's part and parcel of our history that we do not need to forget. We should never forget it. And also it helps us to go forward in expanding our consciousness. Now this ties into, because this story doesn't end there, this ties into that whole Black Night at the Cathedral Castle, but the Canterbury Cathedral, but also at a castle not too far away from where we were in this video, where Tanya had some revelations going on, which will be coming up in the next few weeks. If you haven't subscribed already, what are you waiting for? There's so much more to come. We are going to be talking about this on the live tonight at 2100 hours UK time. If you want to join in, questions answered, could be about these videos, could be about the weekly readings we do, the messages from energy, all the other energy videos that we do on this channel, whichever way it is, the greater understanding, the greater consciousness, the better that everybody will be. So we will see you there later on tonight. Thanking you very much for all the support you give to this channel. Really do appreciate it. In the meantime, don't forget, life should be fun. So please do enjoy.